You're very welcome, all of you, to the first panel on the What is a Play Symposium, marking the 20th anniversary of Playography Ireland. I'm very briefly just going to introduce you to the audience. Firstly, Chris, I'll introduce you. Dr. Chris Morash, who is a valued member of the Irish Theatre Institute Board and the inaugural Seamus Heaney Professor of Irish Writing at Trinity College. I'd like to welcome Sonya Kelly, award-winning Irish playwright and a friend and alumni of Irish Theatre Institute, and our acclaimed critic and journalist, Lynn Gardner, who many of us know only too well for the support of Irish work over the years in many places here and abroad. I'm going to hand you over to Chris, I think, who will moderate, and that you will introduce yourselves and enjoy the debate on A Play is Shared Finitude, a quote from Martin Sharry's essay in What is a Play. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much, Jane. Right, and very welcome to everybody. Yeah, a theatre is a shared finitude. I think, one of the fascinating things about this project around the Irish playography is, with the Irish playography, we have this database, this record of Irish theatre for more than a century, and asking various people, from Tom Kilroy to Martin Sharry to comment on it and to kind of reflect on it and to, I suppose, distill from it what it is that makes a play. It's a kind of fascinating way to start thinking about what theatre is, and in some ways, Sherry's piece is kind of almost one of the most poetic. There's kind of free association element about it, where he talks about the bird hitting the window. But this idea that theatre is a shared finitude, I think, is in some ways one of those ideas that when you hear it, it sounds obvious. It sounds like, yes, it is. But it's not often the finitude, I suppose, that we focus on in the first instance, the fact that theatre has boundaries. So I suppose one of the things that kind of this raises for me is the question of, not just when does the play end, but where does the play end? So what I suggest is maybe we break this down, that there are two bits here. There's the shared bit and the finitude bit. And I think the shared bit is, maybe it's the easier one, so let's leave that to last. Let's take the finitude piece of it. Sonya, as somebody who writes plays and works in theatre, when you saw that word finitude, what's your response to that, of a play as a finitude?
I looked it up. No, okay.
Always a good choice.
I just thought it was so elegantly succinct, and so it's just almost like a haiku of a thought. I think for me, I put an enormous value on the ending of a play as soon as I can, and very often I have a drawer full of endings here and no beginnings, but a strong ending and an emotional attachment to that ending is very often what gets you through the rest of the creation of a play. And for me, to begin a play with just an excited feeling about an ending, or it's about, for me, knowing where you would like your audience to be, and now all you have to do is find a way for them to get there. And I think what it does for me is put the audience's experience at the center of the writing process. And I really do think it's not theatre until they show up. And so I think everything I've sort of had produced, I've had like all I can describe as an extremely emotional attachment to the moment that closes the experience for them. And so I put a huge value on Martin's beautiful sentence, because it certainly means a lot to me. And if you have an ending, that is something you can hold on to in the dark. And playwriting is so much to do with feeling around in the dark and hoping that the lights come on in the room.
I like that. Yeah, feeling around in the dark. Lynn, as a working critic of vast experience, is the proof of the pudding in the ending? When you're in that situation where you're watching a show and the deadline is looming to write about it, is it the ending that is the thing that will confirm a play for you as working, or how does that factor into that process?
No, I don't think that it's just the ending. It's something much bigger than that. I mean, I have to say, I think what Sonya is saying is really kind of eloquent. And I'm just, as somebody who also writes novels for children, without doubt, for me, like Sonya, in fact, I would say that the last page of a novel is almost always the thing that I have that I write first, and then the rest of what I write is a journey towards that ending. But I have to say, when I was originally asked to be on this panel, I was told, "Oh, we're going to be talking about play endings," and I went, "Oh yeah, that's quite interesting." Then I saw the title of it, a play is Shared Finitude, and I went, "Oh my goodness, you've got the wrong woman entirely," because perhaps I was very pleased when Sonya said that she went and looked it up, because I didn't know what finitude was, but it is beautifully poetic, and I thought the whole of Martin's essay was. But I think I might disagree. In a sense that I think a play has no ending, perhaps. That actually it's the audience that ends a play, and perhaps the moment that they end it is the moment when they stop thinking about it. But that otherwise the play lives on. There's a wonderful UK company called Coney, who some of you may know, who do a lot of work in the kind of digital sphere and in interactive theatre. And they have this kind of, I think, quite interesting idea that the play begins the moment that you hear about it, and it only ends when you stop thinking about it. And of course, that doesn't have to be a continuous thought about it. It's about the fact, and it happens to me all the time, that I suddenly remember a moment or something in a play that I saw 30 years ago. And it is alive and present and, as it was, as present and as alive as it was in the moment when I was in the theatre. So no, I don't think it's about endings. In fact, I think endings are often in the theatre sometimes the least interesting moment of the show. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point, and we can make that argument as you've just done in relation to theatre companies today working at sort of the cutting edge of new technologies and so on. We could also maybe go back to a time when to the 18th century or the 19th century, when indeed the early part of the 20th century, when theatre companies had plays in rep that they would revive year after year. So you have audiences that know particular plays very well, and they will go back to see them again and again. It was not a case of, oh well, I've seen King Lear, I go back to it again. So in some ways, there's a kind of historical precedent, I think, for what you're saying, is that the play lives on in the audience in between productions almost.
It does, and there's a desire to see, it's particularly Shakespeare or Ibsen, there are so many ways to interpret them. There's so many angles you can take. There's so many sort of moral and ethical and stylistic aspects, and you want to go and see so-and-so's version of it. And certainly those plays that are so structurally wrought and kind of timeless, you can just return to again and again, and they are always with you. And I agree with you what you said, Lynn, about the most special moments in the theatre I still carry with me. I'm still upstairs in the International Bar when I saw Eileen Walsh and Cillian Murphy do Disco Pigs. I'm still in the New Theatre when I saw I Heart Alice. Those moments where you feel, I was here when this happened, and you take it with you forever. But given that those two plays had the most spectacular endings I think I've ever seen, where it's just almost like a religious experience, I think.
Yes, there is that sense that we carry theatre with us as memory, if you like, and I think maybe come back to that. We kind of think maybe think a bit about theatre and liveness. It's funny, when I read this theatre as a shared finitude, I immediately took it in a completely different way that didn't have anything to do with endings or necessarily, but more about the space of the theatre, the way in which the experience of theatre going is about, I suppose, submitting ourselves to a defined space where something happens. When you're working on a play, Sonya, I mean, is that something you're kind of conscious of, that you're very much kind of defining a space, which could be as much a cage as it is a frame?
Absolutely, and the rules make it elegant, and the parameters make it elegant, and sometimes, depending on the type of story I'm writing, and where sometimes the audience have to be across, sometimes action or is plot, and if everybody doesn't see it collectively at the same time, they won't all know what's happening. So I look at it and go, this play cannot be in thrust, this play cannot be in traverse. It's got to be end on, or so I'm already thinking about how the shape of the space supports the story or the sort of the polemic of it or whatever. And very often, like, I'll be typing away, and sometimes I'm typing from the stage and I'm in it, and sometimes I'm sitting in the audience watching it. And but those parameters are very important, and there are types of plays that work so well in big spaces and ones that don't, and all of those things. I picture theatres, and I picture where it might be, and sometimes even that's what helps you get through a draft.
Right, is the actual space.
But then you look at anything that sort of is revered for its elegance. A football match lasts a certain amount of time, it's played within this square, there are a certain amount of players. If you didn't have those rules, there'd be chaos. It wouldn't be compelling if it didn't have something to hold it in and to contain it. So
yeah. And Lynn, if we were going to kind of map kind of the big trends in theatre over the past 20 years, has the, I suppose, the exploration of what constitutes that space, has that been one of the things that really has changed in theatre?
I think that it does, and I think it has been, and I think there are numerous reasons for that. And of course, I think it's to do with the fact that space almost always has gatekeepers around it, and so therefore the questions are for theatre makers and for playwrights, which is, how can I access space? And so that often how and where they might access space is beyond those traditional and indeed absolutely beautiful theatres, and people looking for other spaces in order to do that. And I suppose one of the things that I think that's been I think if that has been a trend of the last 20 years, then I would say that during the last almost 20 months, maybe 19 months, that actually what we've seen is the movement of theatre into other spaces. And those might be digital spaces, and they might be spaces, I mean, during the last 19 months, I've had plays that have been delivered to me via screens, via telephone, via text messages, via postcards, via letters. And the other thing I think that's interesting in relation to this is potentially about the fact that what that means is that there is no limit on what the length of the play might be. Yeah. So I've been actually involved in certain projects which have taken place over a week, and I'm doing something at the moment which is taking place over months. Yeah. And that raises really interesting questions for what a theatre is, how it might be, and how you then write and construct it for an audience and for their experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One of the things that struck me reading the essays that the various theatre makers contributed to this project on the Irish playography was how John Cage was a touchstone for, I think, about 4 or 5 of them. I kept coming across John Cage, and Rosemary Jenkinson ends with Cage's piece "As Slow as Possible," which is a musical composition designed to last 639 years. And I think the next chord is due sometime next year. That is played very, very slowly. But it's that this is kind of beyond durational theatre. This is theatre in which, I suppose, recognizing that time and a sort of temporal finitude, if you like, is part of the makeup of theatre, is just being pushed to new limits. And you're saying, pieces that last over months.
Right. I think the danger that what happens often in these kind of situations, and certainly it's something that I've experienced as a critic and as a journalist, is editors or indeed friends turning around and saying to me, "But Lynn, is that theatre?" And I think that one of the things, and I think that applies to the whole of this conference, is about actually expanding beyond those boundaries and beyond those ideas of what we think a play or a piece of theatre is.
Yeah, and I suppose that's in some ways that's kind of part of the point as well. That people were asking John Cage, but John, is that music? And it's precisely the point, I suppose, which sometimes work like that is trying to pose. Can I just, before we leave the finitude part, move on to the shared? And I think, Lynn, you've already touched on the shared aspect in some ways. But before we move on from that, if we're accepting in some way the premise that theatre is a shared finitude, does that also imply the opposite as well? That when you produce something that is finite in some way, whether it lasts 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or 6 months, and you do it within a space, whether that's within a proscenium arch stage or takes place over a whole city, are you sometimes implying the existence of something that is not finite? Which is a problem, an idea our culture has real problems with, I think. I think particularly say Sonya, when you take a play like yours, like Once Upon a Bridge, are in some ways are what you're doing there. You're creating a play that's based around a very particular space, but is trying to open up things that are beyond that space.
Absolutely, and I think that's a play based on an actual event that had no closure. That sort of there was an absence of finitude in terms of it. It never came to a resolution, and it drifted off the internet, and everybody was left to wonder. But I was left with it. So I in order to, I suppose, the writing of that play was to make sense an event, to create a fiction in service of a truth, and if there was a truth, what might that truth have been, I guess. And so the genre, if you like, of historical fiction allowed me to go out and explore beyond the actual incident of the Jogger and Putney Bridge, to unpick what their politics might have been, structurally what their politics might have been, like how that tiny event of somebody knocking somebody into the path of an oncoming bus began centuries ago almost, in terms of their personal past and their legacies and why they're there. So it sort of traveled backwards and forwards and everywhere. And I guess like the play ended, obviously, but I think the questions still sort of spill forward, because it's, like I said, it's a play in search of an answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's just when I'm thinking about this, I was thinking, just how many plays that I suppose endure, create a very, very confined space or controlled space, and intimate something else out there that is bigger than that.
You create the scene in your head, and it's something I think about as well. Is the landscape something that the audience sees or imagines? And often that can tell you sort of what type of play you're working on, I think. Is it an empty space where the words create the landscape in the mind's eye of the audience or not? And I think with Once Upon a Bridge, it was definitely the case. We also had the limitation of the deepest, darkest lockdown, where the limitations around the production were so rigid that I think it almost allowed it to be what it was because of that rigidity.
Right. And and yet at the same time able to intimate something bigger off there.
Absolutely. And but also with that production, what worked, I think, was each actor looked down the camera into the eyes of the audience in the living rooms, and it was the tension that you feel, that tension that comes from being in, that's created between an auditorium and a stage, we tried to recreate by the eye to eye, and taking away the things that really are theatre, where you're pretending they're not there or something like that. There's an acknowledgement of the audience existed, which I think created like the intimacy of it.
Yeah. And I think that gives us a nice kind of slide into the idea of theatre as not just a finitude, but a shared finitude. And I just want to pick up on that and go back to some of the things Lynn was saying about the way in which, I suppose, the adaptations that I suppose theatre makers were kind of forced to adopt over the past 18 months or so have potentially expanded the space of theatre. I mean, Lynn, would you see this continuing? Do you expect to get more plays on postcards?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope that it will, because I think one of the other things that we kind of need to kind of think about, you know, in terms of that is about access, and it's about who can get access to those spaces, whether they are artists or in fact whether they are audiences. And one of the things that digital theatre or theatre delivered by postcards has done is about the fact that anybody can access that, whereas actually it's quite hard if you're in a wheelchair, for example, to certainly in the UK, to access a lot of our most splendid buildings, theatre buildings. So I think that anything that widens access either for artists or indeed for audiences is potentially a really good thing. So yes, I'm in favour of it.
Okay. What about you, Sonya? Would you see yourself continuing to work on theatre that's you know designed to be at least partly streamed, maybe live and streamed, or you know once we get back, or once now that we're back into theatres, is that where you're going to stay?
I think I think there is scope. What I think has been interesting in coming back to theatre after being away from it for so long and going to stuff in the Dublin Theatre Festival, and the joy of walking into a foyer and having your ticket ripped or your and sitting down and feeling that energy of the acknowledgement of people feeling things at the same time, and then it ending forever and we all separate with all of those feelings still intact in our heads, and nothing can ever beat that. But I absolutely agree with Lynn that I think that the technology has given access to people who would never be near theatre through either throughout their geography or for any other reason. And I think that's a special thing, and I think there will be I think you will see a lot more of come see it live or see it on this night where we can get it to your home. And I don't think one is going to suffer through the other, because I think that certainly from what I've seen in Dublin, that the absolute joyous hunger for going back into a theatre again it's been so special. I've just had the best time going to see shows over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
So, but to answer your question, however the play tells, sometimes it just shows up and goes, here's where it needs to be, Sonya. And you go, but look at, no, go, here is where it needs to be. And you really have to listen to the play, because sometimes it tells you that. And you have to always be open to that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, Lynn, you want to commit on that?
I think what Sonya is saying is absolutely true. I think there is a danger, and I think there is a danger amidst people in the theatre community itself to see it as a binary, as a kind of either or. And I think it's not. It's about that both have endless possibilities. And the way that I would put it is that it's a bit like turning round and saying you could have a tin of peaches and you can have a fresh peach. And I personally think they're both really delicious, but they're completely different from each other.
Yeah.
And
that's really good. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy. I'll have to remember that. I mean, say in the universities, we're running into the same question as that over the past year or two, we've become very good at online teaching, and students obviously want more face to face, and it's a case of just maybe not throwing out the whole baby with the bathwater.
Very important to have rousing cafes though when you're 20.
It is, yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. I just remind people who are watching here to that this is live and interactive. We're not pre-recorded, so please, if you have questions, to throw them into the chat. Can I play the devil's advocate to this, though? That I think there's long been a kind of argument, and I think of the work of people like Peggy Phelan, for instance, who would argue that the thing that makes theater is the fact that it's not reproducible. I mean, she uses the word is non-reproductive. Performance implicates the real, she says, through the presence of living bodies. Without a copy, live performance live performance plunges into visibility. Basically, she says the thing that makes theater and not something else is that it's live. Is that an aspect of theater that we are giving up, or are we just redefining what live is?
Yeah, radio survived. Like when you think about all the things you think that we're going to sort of wither in obsolescence through the kind of more advanced way, faster we accelerate in terms of our technological evolution, radio survived.
Yeah.
And but it's found other ways to be radio as well, while still staying itself. And I see the same thing for theatre. And I think, of course, you can record it, you can do this or you can that. And for people who want the value of seeing it in that moment and it literally dying second by second as you watch it, and then it's gone forever. And I think, of course, that's available. But I do think it's hugely important to take away the positives and go, a shared right is not a lost right. And I think everybody should have the right to access it if they can. And I don't think it impairs the value of theatre in any way or impairs the value of that statement. By having other ways of consuming it.
Lynn, where would you?
I mean, my view is why can't we have it all? I feel a bit like the child with their nose against the sweet shop window and just going, listen, let's not define, let's not try and police in any way. Let's just turn around and say there are all these various forms. And I'm kind of interested when Sonya refers to radio, because one of the things I've called about kind of radio was about the fact that I think Thomas Beecham, the conductor, when radio first came on, went, "Oh, this is truly terrible. It is going to kill the concert." Did it? No. Another example of that, in terms of technology and how we use things and things differently, is that I once read that when the telephone was first invented, that one of its much touted uses, that everyone went, the telephone, what will people do with that? And people went, we will be able to listen into Broadway shows as they are played live, In fact, of course, that was not what actually the telephone became one of the main, one of its main functions. So I think the point about this is that quite simply, we do not know as yet, but I think we have to embrace the multiple possibilities. And I think we can get way too hung up on the idea of what liveness is. And I think there is a vast difference between watching a show, a digital show, and watching it perhaps on demand on your own, and watching it live with a shared audience. Though having said that, I thought one of the things that was really interesting, I'm afraid it's a UK reference, but is during the first few weeks of lockdown, the National Theatre made a number of their National Theatre live productions. I think they made them available around the world, actually, so you probably could have seen them in Ireland. But the point is, I mean, they were giving us for free something that we had, as British taxpayers, had already paid for. But the point really about it was about the fact that often it was those conversations that were going on Twitter simultaneously and on other platforms as those shows that were happening, which were made something which in a sense was perhaps dead, become alive.
Yeah. I think that you're right, that sense of, you know, community. We use the word community as much to refer to online communities now as actual a kind of live community, and your reference there to, you know, to comments on Twitter. You know, I remember being at a streaming of, it was a show from the Gate, Frank McGuinness's Visiting Hour, and a whole series of wits got onto the chat and pretended they were in the theater. Excuse me, is this my seat? I think you're in my seat. You know, as all the kind of chatter that would happen in an auditorium beforehand, and it was entertaining. You know, not as entertaining as the play, but it was entertaining. I think somebody in the audience has come in with a comment. This is Ruthie Locks, who says, nothing can beat the experience of theatre, but I think theatres must, uppercase, continue to live stream or to share plays, because otherwise they're definitely losing audiences. Do the theatre companies with which you work intend to continue making stage plays available to people who live outside the cities? And is the intention being carried out? He says, because they say, because I'm worried. I've seen so many plays during lockdown, and when I city dwelt, but now it's not happening. So I presume they mean they saw so many plays being streamed during lockdown. So I suppose, you know, here's somebody very actively engaged with theatre who's saying they really want to see.
Yeah. I think companies will. I think there's huge value in it, and I think people have invested in the technology now, and I don't think it's fair to abandon it. And certainly with Once Upon a Bridge, that was a commission made for when there was a window of reduced audiences where we were hoping to have 15 people a show, and then the decision was made then when things changed to move to a live stream. I was devastated that it wasn't going to be in a theatre, but actually it turned out to be a gift. Like 15,000 people saw it, and it was the only play on in the country. I'm really glad it happened in the way it happened. And so I really do hope companies do think about the people that supported them and engaged during some of the darkest and loneliest times in the last few years, and do find ways to provide that service to them.
Yeah, and I think it opens up possibilities as well. I know I've been involved with a project with the Abbey, the Unseen Plays, which are a series of audio plays. But we were able to do things we wouldn't really be able to do, you know, plays with casts of like 12, 14 people from the 1950s that you probably wouldn't do, but are parts of the occluded canon that have been lost, and you can take a punt on it, you know, because you're doing it with in audio. Something Lynn said earlier, though, still kind of sticks with me. You described the kind of varieties of forms of play you've been experiencing over the past 18 months or 2 years of plays on postcards, plays as tweets, plays as in all sorts of different forms. Once we move away, well, maybe not move away from, but once we do something other than put a group of people in a room as an audience, as a live community, does theatre have to actually then work harder to create that sense of community? In other words, does the project of creating a community actually become something that the theatre has to kind of work harder at, that it can't take it for granted?
I think it's a case of, you know, theatre has to do a bit of work, the community does a bit of work. Like, it's something that evolves slowly out over time, and communities evolve through need to get together, and it's hard to structure or manufacture or engineer. They do just sort of evolve, I guess. And I think new communities through theatre have evolved during the lockdown, and some of the most special moments I've had in the theatre have been sitting outdoors with a hot water bottle on your lap. And there was a production of Aisling Amara's Next Please, which was on in the Stephen's Green, and they were sitting in front of the pond on a bench, and there's this moment, and these swans came and landed behind them, and they had no idea it happened. And if you've ever seen a swan landing, it's extraordinary. And then the little cygnets behind them, and everybody had that moment away with that moment. Nature had a part in it that even the creator of the show had no part in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very special thing. I've digressed a bit from your point, but
no, not at all. In fact, Aisling O'Mara's just
quite special.
Yeah. Aisling O'Mara's just been in on the chat to say, do you feel we should shy away as playwrights from the building big cast plays for the work to see light of day?
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think does she mean like the big cast play for a building, or?
I think playwrights are scared to write something with 15 people in it because it'll never see the light of day. But I think if you make a case for anything, and if you make it well enough, somebody will chase you down the street for it. I'd still like to hold on to that hope that if it is hopping off the page and leaping into the producer's face, anything is possible still. You have to think that way.
Okay, great. I see the clock's against us here. We have an interesting comment from Willie White, who's asking the question about diverting resources from live performance to stream performance. I'm going to let that hang there as the kind of...
Let it hang.
Let it hang. Well, in the best possible way. So look, we've been talking about the theatre as a shared finitude. I just very much like to thank both Lynn and Sonya. I thought I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to hand back to Jane, who has rejoined us.
Thank you, Chris. I have to say the discussion has stimulated exactly the sort of topics we'd hoped it would, and it's also presented us with all sorts of thoughts around the parameters for inclusion in the playography that we've been grappling with for the last 2 years around the digital and capturing the digital repertoire that has emerged throughout lockdown, which presents all sorts of interesting challenges for playography in the future. I think the previous session ended with, if you find the answer to a question, keep it to yourself. This one has talked a lot about being in search of answers and kind of is it the end of the beginning in some ways. And that lovely expression, I think, that was there about holding the experience, that the play lasts as long as you hold the experience. So I think you've set the tone for the next set of discussions, and thank you so much, Lynn, Chris and Sonya, for throwing so many interesting questions out there. Your participation is very much valued. We're going to go to another short break now. Ask people to be back at 11:45 sharp for the second panel, which is entitled "The Rest is Up to Us," which is a quote from Philly McMahon's piece. Philly was charged with the responsibility of drawing all 5 of the other essays together, which was no mean feat, but he achieved it, needless to say. So "The Rest is Up to Us" will be a discussion from makers and creatives, including designers John Comasky, Dennis Clohessy, writer Elaine Murphy will moderate, and Fiona Keller, production manager and stage manager, will impart their wisdom. So thank you. We'll be back in probably about 6.5 minutes.